Now this is all that's left of these structures after a fire. Most of the ones today I think are made out of cement and rebar, but you can see like that, those houses there are probably all pretty much the same as this one. This is a kind of a little tuk-tuk, except that these are a little bit different. You sit on these benches here, here on Ayutthaya, but this is a repair station, and this lady is probably a repair lady. And these things get tremendous service. Notice that the kickstand on it is, well, lots of chain, sorry. And that's her little place in there. I'm on what's kind of a back street, but not really. But notice this is why houses are on stilts. Because particularly here where you're sitting on an island, this apparently is what the water table is, not far beneath where I'm standing. These are very much different than what you see in Bangkok. And that may be because perhaps it's slightly cooler here, I don't know. So I'm going to cross this street in search of my starting point for looking at Watts. Okay, my hostel is right where that X is. And theoretically I'm right at this street right here, but this just can't be. On the other hand, this is a klong. So here I'm at the remains of an old temple apparently, or at least a temple area. This gives you an idea of how its basic construction is, made out of brick. Just a little bit of remnant there of the stucco and cement that goes over it. And this banyan tree or whatever it is gives us a rough idea of how long this has been sitting here, pretty much abandoned. But still, there are offerings and merits made here. This is probably one of the last of this kind of conveyance. Some of the detail. Some more of the detail. Notice that admission for foreigners is probably a whole lot more than the locals. I don't know what that local number means. They're probably 10 baht at most. And that is this one right here, 26. Okay, this is just one of several huge complexes of buildings and shrines. And what you have to understand here, is this is what remains of what was one of the greatest capitals in the southeast. It was a trade center for Europeans as well as Southeast Asia. Embassies from France and Britain were here. This was considered by Europeans as one of the great cities in the world at the time. Unfortunately, once, I think in the 1700s, and then 200 years later, the Burmese finally sieged for a year and then totally destroyed this city, tearing down most of all the useful buildings. For whatever reason, these still remain. And they removed all the people, if not slaughtered them, and decimated apparently the land around so that it was not used for a long, long time afterward. Very much what the Romans finally did to Carthage. Here, other than a few grand pans, the most I can do is look for detail. Here's some stone carving. And height, of course, is an important thing for religious monuments, oftentimes, a la the Mayans. This does not appear to be an entryway, but rather an entry to the shrine of place of offering there. This looks like a bird nest of an oriole, a hanging bird nest perhaps, of the bird we hear in the background sometimes. Here a good mind can perhaps piece together some of the remaining elements scattered about into a vision of what one would have looked like, and then extrapolate that to the whole complex. I can't. These appear to be some surviving chunks off of those spires, but there it looks like probably the remains of Buddhas that were on these pedestals that are in between each of the chedai. I think they're called chedai. And notice that the entire complex was surrounded by a wall. Who knows how high it was? Maybe we'll see evidence of that. This building was built under the direction of King Narai, N-A-R-A-I, Narai, with intentional European influences, i.e. the positioning of bricks to a form to provide these arched windows. And what the Burmese did not do, nature is quite willing to do by allowing the ground to sink disproportionately, causing it to tip. Again, try to imagine the majesty of this area with these huge chedai and the smaller ones. These buildings that might have been here, these walkways, and how they would have been in perfect condition. Let's take a closer look at that remaining structure, which looks quite good. Shots like this epitomize the irony of current civilizations that believe they are somehow forever invincible, like the United States. Here a good idea of the thin veneer of stucco or plaster, whatever. And building after building representing some kind of a temple for the worship of Buddha. Even currently so. And I would wonder if these columns are European in influence. This is part of the entryway, but I wonder what that hole is there for. A little bit better sense of the height of the wall of. Again, just panning for the. That is the Wat that I have just seen. Now what we might try to do here is to see or detect differences in the style between this and what we saw in Bangkok. Not as ornate, simple graphic, descriptive designs of worshipping tables. Notice that the Buddha looks very similar to what we've seen before, but that the pillars and the walls appear to be undecorated. Only the ceiling has decoration. Decoration of the doors, again, far, far more restrained, less ornate detail. Though it may have gone higher. Beyond this is apparently the royal palace, or what was. I wonder what this large pit was for. Now it's storing water. Did it do the same then? And if this was the royal palace, you can certainly see that the Burmese made a point of destroying it. Here, evidence that this small structure was surrounded by small columns. This, a rather large structure. Perhaps it would have been a wat. And here, the remains of another. Its columns, at least, remaining. How curious. In Rome, in those places, the columns seem to be some of the most poignant remnants of the past. And of course, these columns' surface were probably all painted with murals as well as the walls. Anything of significant and usable value, like Buddhas and so forth, were removed from here to Bangkok after Bangkok followed Ayutthaya as the dominant political, religious, business, social center. Now this little scrap is interesting because it shows a column made of stone. How big it was, I don't know. But stone must have been very an important purpose to have been made of stone, I mean. Here's some beautiful carving monuments. Whatever they are, I don't know. We'll get a closer look in a moment. Here, a little temple monument with some detail left at the top. We'll take a quick look at it. Here's a closer look. It looks like the one to the right is a little bit smaller than the one to the left. Notice a little bit of a diamond motif carved on the surface in the center. And these relatively modest temples are known as Ubosat. I'll look that up later. Here what we see, what would have been a large Buddha surrounded by these smaller Buddhas. And then this decorative motif on the side. And here, more of the remains of a Buddha. Notice the sash, and the decoration on the garment. Now, what's interesting is, as I walk further on, there are more and bigger Buddhas. Notice, though, it's a large, a small, and perhaps an even smaller one if we gauge the serpent size as an indicator of inverse size of the Buddha. Now here's good entrepreneurship, Siam City Bank Exchange, mobile. What this was originally for, or what it's for now, I don't know. But it's at least a pretty little respite. There are fish in it, carp of some sort probably. I wonder if it's analogous to the pit that I saw when we were looking at the Royal Palace that ain't no more. And at each of the corners are steps, so perhaps this was for something analogous to baptismal. I don't know. This looks like a clone. Whether it was original or not, I don't know. Certainly you would think to the royalty and in a town of the incredible sophistication that this city was, water would have been revered and as a transportation, and certainly as its tranquility in park-like environments perhaps as this was. Although we have to beware of looking at areas like this that are open. More than likely they also were filled with structures of some sort. This wat was built in 1912 by King Ramaswan on the cremation site of his father. Now that's 1912 BE. I don't think that's our 1912. Again, we'll be just glancing at things, looking for something different. There are many Chedai that we have seen before. An interesting entryway. And there in the background, I think it's called a prang or a tower. Definitely different than what we've seen before. What its significance of style is, I don't know. Notice things growing out of the top of it. And notice that these Chedai are of different design, at least two on the right are different from each other, and from these two. And also notice that all three of these are clustered together as opposed to the first Wat complex that we looked at, where there were Chedai all around to the perimeter of the walled complex. And from the look of this structure, there would have been a much, much larger Buddha seated on it. Here we'll walk through a relatively narrow building structure that may have housed Buddha all along its shelving here. As we saw in Bangkok's Wats. Again, just panning for the view. And the fact that this is a walkway structure with Buddhas on either side. And notice that one side is somewhat higher than the other for whatever that significance is. But this long, narrow passageway is unique so far. Here the remains of a Buddha face, which has lost its artistic glory, but probably retains its capacity for reverence. In each of the artistic periods, which there were several, including Sukhothai, Lana, and here at Ayutthaya, and Bangkok, the criteria or the attributes of the architecture as well as the sculpture was very specific, very well controlled, although it did leave some margin for innovation, apparently. And one of those differences that I've seen here so far is this kind of large pedestal that is almost domed, or at least upside down, saucer shaped. Perhaps it held a Buddha. You can be sure of that. Imagine how beautiful that would have looked when its detail was perfect and it had coloring. Here a little bit of detail remains. And there in that niche, a figure. Here again another difference, and that is this small arcade with, I'm sure, what were Buddhas here, if not pedestals or towers. Not towers, columns, excuse me. Now, whether these remains of Buddhas here were original to this location or simply reassembled here for protection, I don't know. And here on the other side, a smaller version of the same. Apparently, so if we're going Wat Phra Ram that way. This is a beautiful watery compound with pretty little bridges. What its history is, what it was for. I don't see many people doing anything around it or in it, but that may be because it's too hot. My guess is that this watery compound is green from algae and that kind of matter, because it doesn't get flowing water, rather it gets water that seeps up from the ground table, and therefore it's basically not moving. But it looks like you can fish. Now, from what I gather, this is Wat Thammikarat. The R is pronounced as an L, Thammikarat. 3 girls riding on a motorcycle. This is a little bit interesting even before we get in. Here at Chadai with some sculptured animal monsters. And we can take a closer look at that after I buy a ticket. This looks interesting just because of its huge size and the 2 pillars outside. I don't know if that's what makes this unique or not. Curious wagon in that it's so narrow, and yet it has such big wheels on it. You wonder what its limited purpose would have been. since you would think if you're going to go to the effort of making something like this, you'd make it even wider. Maybe it held logs or wood, so you couldn't carry much because it was heavy, and this was it. This is interesting, but it looks new. And notice that this Buddha has some spots of gold on it, plus a couple of squares on it like it was being tested. Or maybe that's a form of offering, or I don't know. Except for the brick construction, this looks something like what you might see in Europe, particularly in Rome. What is interesting is the significance, if any, of these chickens or roosters. And more down there. But I would like to focus a bit on these critters. Notice again, they're made out of brick and then plaster that's then carved, I suspect. So let's take a close look at them. Do those little rectangles represent a beard? A mustache? An ear, maybe? Now notice this stairway banister decoration, whatever that is. Just guessing from the shape that it may be the cobra head. And notice that there are differences in style of the garments being worn by these monsters. What the significance is, if any, don't know. Here we have one in profile.